The junior doctor strike. Who's in the right? Now in this video we're going to try and give both sides of the argument, and I apologise for the lateness of this, but it's good to get distance from anything that you're examining. We fretted for a long time about the content of this video. We didn't exactly want people to absolutely hate us afterwards, so we had to make sure we got it completely right.
So the headline news is that the government and junior doctors have failed to agree a new contract. And so the British Medical Association have called a number of strike days recently to oppose this contract. More recently, the government has said that since the BMA won't agree to the new contract, they are going to impose it instead. Which they are legally within their right to do, but we'll get to that. And after many strikes where junior doctors removed non-essential care, the BMA called a strike action for junior doctors to hold all care, including emergency care. Before I mention the BMA arguments against the new contract, I want to talk about what the government was actually trying to achieve with the new contract. Essentially, the details of the contract originally stem from two things. There's evidence to suggest that more avoidable mistakes are made at the weekend, and the government believes that increasing staffing levels to weekday levels will, to some extent, fix that. However, the government also wishes to get spending under control, and so won't pay more for junior doctors to work at the weekends. So the new contract was the brainchild of good intentions and a tight budget.
So let's quickly talk about this 7-day NHS concept. There's a lot of confusion about what this concept actually means, because the NHS kind of already runs 7 days a week. I mean, hospitals don't just close over weekends. A&E departments still have the same amount of staff as they do on weekdays. Emergency cover is still 100%. What doesn't happen are things that are called elective procedures. These are non-urgent, pre-arranged doctor's appointments and surgeries. These don't take place currently on the weekend. And from what I can gather from the Conservative Party manifesto, they want these kinds of procedures to be done on weekends. Yeah, that seems fair enough. Get people to go to the doctor on the weekend so they can work in the weekday. If you're going to pay for it. You actually have to pay for these services, not only for the extra doctors that's going to require, but the extra hours that current doctors are going to put in. And that's a thing that's just not happening. Jeremy Hunt said there would be an increase of 5,000 doctors to spread the overall workload and burden of this new contract. But there's already a 2% shortfall in the number of GPs there are in the country. The government has already said that this 2% shortfall will be brought up by 400 doctors being brought in from abroad. But that 2% shortfall counts for 657 doctors. Now, I don't know about you, but my C and GCSE maths is telling me that 400 is less than 657. So staffing is an issue before the contracts even come into effect.
To make this work, the government is trying to redefine what gets counted as unsociable hours and how much you get paid for those hours, so that they can have more doctors working at the weekend for no extra cost. However, they realise that on its own this wouldn't fly, so they're offering a 13.5% basic pay increase to all doctors during the weekday, as well as a few other pay tariffs and asterisks on the side. One of the BMA's main arguments is that junior doctors are receiving a pay cut. I feel like this almost has to be untrue. A pay rise for sociable weekday hours worked and a pay cut for unsociable hours worked, including at the weekend. Before I go on, I also want to mention that the BMA and the government do seem to be in agreement about evening pay. There is no issue there. Now, presumably, since this whole ordeal revolves around the fact that not as many doctors are working at the weekend, it stands to reason that most doctors are working during the weekday, so most of their hours will be receiving a pay rise. Surely only doctors predominantly working at the weekends will be receiving a pay cut. And the government has also made a concession that those doctors who will be receiving a pay cut will receive a pay protection for 3 years. So yes, the government is proposing a deal where some workers will lose out. But if most receive a pay rise, and if, a big if, it also reduces the number of avoidable accidents, then this has to be a good deal.
Okay, let's look at how bad this deal actually is. Firstly, this idea of the pay rise that Will brought up. Sounds amazing, right? But that assumes that being a doctor is like a normal job with normal hours. And it's just not. The fact is that 30 to 40% of junior doctors' pay comes from something called banding. Basically, this is the extra pay you get from working weird times, like nights and weekends. All doctors work nights and weekends. That's just how the profession works. You don't have a choice. So it's just part of how they are paid, and that was previously taken into account. And that's how this new contract kind of screws them over. The new contract changes Saturdays to normal working days, and not unsociable hours, and thus cuts everyone's pay there. It also reduces the amount that can be earned from nights.
Having spoken to a few doctors, it does seem that about 30% of their pay does come from working unsociable hours. Furthermore, I crunched the numbers from the BBC's website on how the pay bands will change, and have calculated that the government proposal is worth about 4% less per week on average than the BMA proposal. It was a really rough calculation, by the way, but I am now convinced that junior doctors will be receiving a pay cut on average.
That might be true, but all of this clouds the central issue. And that is that doctors don't do this for the money. If that were true, they'd all move to America, where on average they'd earn 20% more than they do here. Right out of uni! And if this were actually about money, then you would have heard something about the 15% pay cut they've taken over the last 4 years. I mean, did you hear about anything like that in the news?
I don't recall anyone mentioning this 15% pay cut from the last few years, and I don't think I've heard the BMA talking about it either, which is why I don't think this is really a part of the issue. The BMA's other and most important argument, in my opinion, is that for there to be more staff on at the weekend, the doctors will have to work more hours. Doctors already work hard enough, so increasing their hours further is going to cause them to make more avoidable mistakes, which is exactly what the government has been trying to decrease in the first place. Good argument, but the government is also lowering the cap on the maximum number of hours a doctor can work each week, as well as creating a number of other safeguards about being overworked. How can they lower the maximum number of hours a doctor can work each week whilst still increasing the number of hours doctors are working overall? Well, I do think they will lower the cap as they say, but increase the average number of working hours per doctor. So most doctors will work more, but the most overworked doctors will work less. Overworked doctors will make the most avoidable mistakes. So reducing the number of overworked doctors whilst increasing the number of hours worked by doctors on average might actually do what the government intends. If increasing the average number of hours worked whilst decreasing the maximum number of hours worked does as the government intends, then this contract should work.
Now it's time to talk about this dirty little secret, which everyone knows but no one's really willing to admit to. Are you listening? Doctors don't log all of their hours. The fact is that doctors, like all working people, are only allowed to work a certain amount of hours per week. And according to the European Working Time Directive, that's 90 hours a week, but only if it's averaged out as 48 hours a week over a 6-month period. The fact is that doctors just work way more than this. They just don't log the hours. Ask anyone in the NHS and they'll tell you that patient safety always comes first. Always. So if these guys are about to leave, or their shift is done, and something happens, they will stay until the job is done. But because they're not technically allowed to be working these hours simply aren't logged. Doctors stay to do the work because they don't want people to die, and they don't claim the money for it. They can claim those hours by getting them signed off by a consultant, but that's just not the done thing. That's not the ethos of the workplace. They just don't do it. It's not about the money. It's not about personal gain. It's about patient safety.
Again, actually, I will concede that having spoken to a number of doctors, different ones from you by the way, which I think it's important that we're getting our information from different places, that they will regularly work beyond their official hours. Now, as far as I can tell, the BMA haven't been very good about communicating about when their concerns have been met. Most recently, the talks broke down again when Jeremy Hunt said he was going to impose the new contract upon the doctors, which was the lead up to the most recent set of strikes where all care, including emergency care, was removed by junior doctors. Jeremy Hunt chose his words badly because he cannot force a change on contracts that already exist without the permission of the doctors involved in that contract. But he's not actually intending to do that. By impose, what he means is that the current contracts will remain the same, but anyone signing a new contract after this point will have to sign up to the new contract, and there will be no discussion about that, which he is legally allowed to do. The BMA's current stance seems to be that they will call off the strikes if Jeremy Hunt is willing to back down from imposing the new contract. What terrifies me the most is that a lot of their original qualms seem to have been mostly addressed, and their new main argument for the strike seems to be that the contracts are being imposed, which imposed is completely the wrong word to use. If this is their reason for the strike, then the strike is no longer about the content of the contract or anything to do with its implementation being illegal, but because they're not sure how to back down without losing face. I believe that junior doctors are being grossly misled by the BMA, but I also believe that the government is somewhat at fault. They've been entirely thoughtless at many points in this horrid mess. I'm just terrified that for 2 whole days an already stretched NHS lost 1/3 of its workforce for a strike which no longer makes sense.
Okay, there's a lot to say here, so we'll start with the obvious bits. The most obvious point to make here is that doctors can read, and thus they can read contracts. They haven't simply been hoodwinked by some massive faceless organisation. We're dealing here with quite possibly the largest body of super smart people in the country. I mean, you'd hope so, they're in charge of keeping us all alive. Now, when this group of super smart people were voting on this contract to see if it was a good deal for them, they had a 78% turnout. Trust me when I say this as a political scientist, but 78% is a gigantic number, like actually massive. And not only that, but 98% of these people voted for a full strike. So you have pretty much all of this group of super smart people saying, we're not okay with this. I get the feeling this contract is a bad deal. Now let's talk about the strike itself for a second here. Now for a start, the BMA have been terrible at informing anyone of anything, especially the public. But also this strike got a lot of flack for putting patients' lives at risk. And that's just empirically not the case. All that's happened is that consultants are taking over the work instead while junior doctors are on the picket lines. Now these guys are at the top of their field and are the most experienced doctors in any hospital. If you still don't think they're up to the job, I point you to a 2015 article written in the British Journal of Medicine. The article showed that in every case of a junior doctor strike across the world, instances of mortality didn't go up. More people didn't die when doctors were on strike. Link in the description. One article even suggested that because of so many senior doctors being on the wards while the strike was happening, patients moved faster to the wards. But that's an issue for a different time.
Please don't forget that the BMA mandate for the strike was received a long time ago, and much progress was made on the contract between receiving the mandate and first going on strike. But as I've said, the BMA have been terrible at keeping the public and junior doctors in the loop about this progress. As a union, they aren't beholden to the public at all, but that doesn't mean they don't need public support.
The government originally said this was all necessary because of a report that came out that said that there were higher mortality rates at weekends. Now, if that's true, then that's awful. Good thing it's not true then. How the data was collected in the paper was highly contested by doctors themselves. This is because in the paper, the weekend was counted from Friday to Monday, and the death rates compared to the rest of the week. Now I think we all wish the weekend was from Friday to Monday, but that is just not the case. So the study is a little bit flawed. One of the reasons we both started making these videos is because we both enjoy discovering new things. But inevitably, as part of the process of gaining new knowledge, you must be prepared to change your perception of an issue. You don't grow unless you challenge yourself.
Yeah, this somewhat clinches it. My original argument, and the government's, was that patients being admitted into hospitals at the weekend were at greater risk of suffering from avoidable mistakes. Having looked into the issue further, it seems that the paper compared emergency care from the weekend with emergency and elective care from the week. Almost by definition, you're going to find less complications during elective care. I might have argued that people's well-being is more important than pay, and so if this contract was going to improve well-being, then I might argue in favour of it. But the paper that was suggesting that better results at the weekend were needed was fundamentally flawed. So I would like to humbly change my stance to be in favour of the junior doctors. But I still think that the BMA needs to be better at communicating with the public. I'm glad that for our very first video we came from two opposite views, and in the end I changed my mind about my view. I think it's incredibly important for people to be able to change their personal beliefs based on new evidence when it comes to light. I don't feel apologetic for not initially supporting the strikes. My opinion was based on my interpretation of the evidence I had at the time. However, as we've said, based on new evidence, my opinion has now changed. If we go through life picking a side based on our gut feeling and then ignoring all the other evidence that's presented to us, then we are often just going to be active in making the world a worse place to live in, all for the sake of protecting our pride and not admitting we're wrong. Being wrong and changing our minds about a strongly held opinion is always going to hurt our pride a little, but it would be even more shameful to make bad decisions that hurt other people because we didn't want to admit we were wrong. I might have argued that paying people less to achieve better results is still a good thing to do.
How do you feel about Captain America at 9:30?
I feel good about it.
Cool. What, with the laughing? leave that one.
I don't know, maybe we should leave this take in.
Yeah, what did your sister say?
My sister and Ben aren't that getting that involved in the whole thing. So Ben was the person I spoke to more, and I actually felt like what he was telling me was so reliable because he was actually like, yeah, I don't really care. I think we're gonna end up working more, and yeah, we always do more than our official hours, and yeah, we're probably gonna get a pay cut. He was like, whatever. So I was like, well, you don't sound like you're
Militant.
overtly militant and hating the government for no reason. So
Yeah.
guess I'm going to believe you on that one. And then my sister was saying about how the paper that this whole thing was based around was based on nonsense information. And I was like, well, probably so you just doing this.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, how about we have that laughing and then we cut and then you say actually.
Money is not a measure of well-being. If money decreases and well-being increases, that's a good thing.
Yeah, so phrase it like that.
Yeah.
Actually, wait, no, when you did it, it'd be so aggressive, just be like, different ones from you, by the way.
What? I'm not going to be sarky about it.
Might be a little bit. Because otherwise it looks like, yeah, fuck you.
Actually, no, we can put that bit right at the end. This is just lol.
Yeah.